Good afternoon to all. This is the fifth day of our FDP, and we are here in our first session. Now I request my colleague, Professor Kanchan Madam, to proceed with the introduction of the speaker.
Good afternoon, everyone. Am I audible? Binor sir?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. You're audible.
Okay. Thank you, Rathore sir. Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Department of English, I, Kanchan Bagul, would like to welcome you all for the first session of Day 5 of 1 week faculty development program on literary theory and criticism organized by the Department of English, KTHM College under Stride Component 1, Research and Capacity Building between 23rd and 28th August 2021. I'm happy to share that today we have with us Honorable Dr. Anil Sonawane, the resource person for this session. We also have with us the respected head of the department, Professor Dr. Sharad Binor, our mentor, Dr. Yogesh Gangude, all the members of organizing committee, and more than 100 participants. It's my honor and privilege to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Anil Sonawane. I must say he is a young, dynamic, and enthusiastic speaker. He has many national and international publications to his credit. He has also attended several international and national symposiums, conferences, and seminars. I would like to tell that he has a great expertise in literature and language, and along with, he has great interest in film studies as well. He has worked on 2 short films, and he has also played a vital role as an assistant director for a TV serial entitled Bhandar Yog, which is awaited, and so we are eagerly waiting for its release. He has been appointed on many important positions. One of them I would like to mention here is the jury member for Sanskriti International Short Film Festival, which was organized by Sanskriti Foundation. He has guided many students. Along with, he has conducted many expert sessions on varied topics like eco-criticism, digital humanities. It's an honor for us to have you with us, sir. Today, he is going to guide us on eco-criticism. I would like to request Dr. Anil, sir, to please go ahead. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this kind introduction. And I'm very glad and thankful to Dr. Professor Sharad Binor. I've been a student. I was a graduate student in KTHM College, Nashik, till 2003, and Dr. Professor Sharad Binor has taught us, me and some of my friends who have been in touch with him even today, English literature, some fond memories of KTHM College English department. To begin, today's topic is quite important and sensitive at the same time. But for me, it is an irony that we have to conduct this session on eco-criticism using laptops and smartphones that would produce electrical waste after a few years and would add to the ecological issues, the concerns that we are dealing with these days. It has to be the moment of self-reflexivity for all of us. As Jacques Derrida, while describing the classical belief of center that holds or governs the structure, it's simultaneously outside the structurality, is a situation, is a coherence in contradiction. And I quote from his essay, Structure, Sign and Play, which is quite well known to people from humanities and particularly English literature people. And I quote, "As always, coherence in contradiction expresses the force of desire, unquote. Here, the force of desire we all share is to be ecological, but being bundled into the practice of leaving carbon footprints, we have to use the technology to talk about ecological crisis. How literature, for example, what we are doing today, represents nature, or what eco-criticism as a method to analyze and interpret texts means. This session begins with a brief description of ecological crisis, an account of how it has been written about. Then it would move on to an idea of Anthropocene and take an overview of a few thinkers, philosophers who challenge the anthropocentric ways of knowledge creation. Then a historical account of development of eco-criticism follows with definitions and a quick survey of authors who have been discussed in anthologies and readers devoted to eco-criticism. The last section is about recent literature that deals exclusively with ecological concerns. And if time permits, we will try to read from a recently published novel to get an idea of what cli-fi or climate fiction is. Okay, so before we begin talking in details, I would like all of you to have a look at this painting that was painted by a Spanish artist called Francisco Goya. He painted this directly on the wall of his house. Michel Serre, one of the French philosophers of whom we are going to talk about, refers to this painting in his book, The Natural Contract. Just have a look at it. What it shows is two people fighting with each other. And mostly whenever you show this picture, people would react to it. And when you ask them to summarize what they see or express what they feel about it, they would generally talk about master-slave relationship, people fighting with each other, and they might die. But the surroundings around them, the world around them, is completely neglected. The fact that they are knee deep down in the mud is also reflected. If they keep fighting on, instead of they killing each other, the mud would suck them down and they would die by nature. Their death would be by nature. So the neglect of the nature around is a problematic situation. Okay, so we move ahead. While thinking about the ecological crisis, the obvious binary in which most of us would think is nature and non-nature, that is human beings and the sensible material objects created by us human beings. Some of the material objects created by us are helping the phenomena like global warming, deforestation, ozone depletion, biodiversity loss, and ocean acidification, to name a few. As Bill McKibben puts it, there is no nature anymore because it is all contaminated by human influence. The underlying assumption here is that human beings are not a part of nature anymore, and I would strongly want to believe that they were a part of nature at some point of time. Coming back to the binary of nature and non-nature or human, the way nature is talked about in almost all disciplines is from the anthropocentric point of view. Is from anthropocentric point of view, that is assuming humankind as the central or most important element of existence as opposed to nature. To understand this, one just has to glance through the history of thought in the humanities, and I choose examples from philosophy Plato, René Descartes, Immanuel Kant, and others have contributed to the humanities luminously, but most of their writings are anthropocentric. Martin Heidegger's project, for example, of developing a new fundamental ontology in Being and Time, published in 1927, lacks ethical dimension. Ontology for Heidegger, by its very nature, attempts to create a totality in which what is different and other to being, to the existence, is necessarily reduced to sameness and identity. This desire for totality is a basic manifestation of instrumental reason, of reason, something that we human beings are proud of. The use of reason as an instrument for determining the best or most efficient means to achieve a given end. And using this instrumental reason, Western philosophy displays a destructive and objectifying will to dominate. Now, this is something important for all of us to think. Human beings would claim that they have this power to reason, and that is what makes them or separates them from the animals or other living beings. This will to dominate has resulted in the damage to the nature by human intervention so severe that the 34th International Geographical Congress that took place in Brisbane in the second half of the year 2011 had to declare that the epoch, the time space in which we live, have been living, has to be called Anthropocene. The word Anthropocene, in this word, scene stands for new, and anthropos stands for human, new human being. The subcommission on quaternary stratigraphy states that, and I quote, the beginning of the Anthropocene is most generally considered to be at the year 1800, around the beginning of the Industrial Revolution in Europe, unquote. At the same time, we have agencies that would deny effects of climate change, especially in the United States. Donald Trump, for example, is considered to be the climate denier in chief, who called global warming a hoax and pulled United States out of the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement. Under Barack Obama's leadership, the United States, along with 195 other countries, endorsed the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement. One of the reasons of this denial is the fossil fuel industry's relentless propaganda for decades that no global warming exists, or human beings are not responsible for the global warming, or naturally the global warming has been happening, it's a natural phenomenon. That's what they would say. As recently as 2020, the first half of the year 2020, Noam Chomsky, in the book Climate Crisis and the Global Green New Deal, written in collaboration with Robert Pauline, who is a progressive economist and leader in fighting for an egalitarian green economy, aptly describes the situation we are in. And I quote, "We cannot overlook the fact that humans today are facing awesome problems that are radically unlike any that have arisen before in human history. They have to answer the question whether organized human society can survive in any recognizable form, and the answers cannot be delayed. The tasks ahead are indeed new and dire. History is all too rich in records of horrendous wars, indescribable torture, massacres, and every imaginable abuse of fundamental rights. But the threat of destruction of organized human life in any recognizable or tolerable form, that is entirely new. It can only be overcome by common efforts of the entire world, though, of course, responsibility is proportional to capacity, and elementary moral principles demand that a special responsibility falls on those who have been primarily responsible for creating the crisis over centuries, enriching themselves while creating a grim fate for humanity. Unquote. I hope that this quotation also reminds you of Amitabh Ghosh's novel, The Glass Palace, which has a lot of pages devoted to how the colonizers had taken timber from Burma via Irrawaddy River and had transported and exported it to Europe. Chomsky openly demands the Europe and United States to take the responsibility for the major role their projects of colonization and non-sustainable development has played in wreaking complete havoc on the nature and speeded up the process of global warming. The first world countries asking the third world countries to limit or reduce the greenhouse gas emission is a problematic position here. Not all greenhouse gases are hazardous though. Carbon dioxide, methane, and chlorofluorocarbons are result of human activity and are more damaging greenhouse gases. Year 1750 onwards, till now, post-industrialization, CO2 emissions have gone up by a humongous 50%. But in India, per capita emissions of greenhouse gases and CO2 is much lower than the Western countries and United States. And Western countries and countries like United States have already enjoyed the luxuries that come out of consuming power. The refrigerators they have used for all these years, the air conditioners, all these luxury items that came to third world countries quite late. Okay, let's have a look at some statistics. United States fossil CO2 emissions, its global share, this is 2016 data that we have, is 14.02% from the entire emissions from the world, and 15.5 tons per capita per person consumption. For Russia, it's 4.65% of global share and 11.44 tons per person. For Canada, global share is 1.89%, 18.58 tons per capita consumption. All the Arab oil-rich countries produce fossil CO2 emissions about 20 to 30 tons per capita, which is quite surprising. China's global share in emissions is 29.18% and per capita 7.38 tons. India's global share is 7.09% and per person 1.91 tons usage or emission of green gases. Pakistan per capita only 0.87%. Apparently, according to the Paris Climate Accord 2015, developed countries have to give $100 billion to developing countries to use more eco-friendly sources of energy consumption. The ethical responsibilities one has towards nature and the fellow beings needs to be thought through carefully. Coming back to the humanities, we have a few thinkers who have tried to deal with the problems of anthropocentric thinking and knowledge creation. Jacques Derrida, in his book, The Animal That Therefore I Am, published in 2008, would state that neither René Descartes or Immanuel Kant, Martin Heidegger, Emmanuel Levinas, nor Jacques Lacan has given such sustained attention to the question of the animal. Animals being treated as other. In particular, neither has questioned the singularity of that term, the animal, a name we men have given themselves the right and the authority to give to the living other. And yet, the very history of who we think we are as humans is tied up in distinguishing ourselves from this other. So we human beings don't distinguish ourselves from just human beings from other class, caste, gender, but this othering also happens with other living beings like plants and animals, and Derrida here focuses specifically on animals. So we have named and subjected for the sake of claiming subjectivity as our exclusive property, treating ourselves as the self and treating others as the other. This history, this autobiography of the human, so Derrida here would say that most of the knowledge creation that human beings have created, it's all biographical, or sorry, autobiographical. It's all about themselves. It's about self. Has nevertheless reached an unprecedented moment that makes such questioning imperative. It is not the fact of subjection that has changed, Derrida emphasizes. It is the means and volume of the subjection in modernity. So human beings have always subjected other living beings, but in modernity, the volume, the amount of subjection and the means used for subjection have changed drastically. Derrida's following thus entails both historical insight and a sense of urgency. And I quote, "No one today can deny this event, that is, the unprecedented proportions of the subjection of the animal. Neither can one seriously deny the disavowal that this involves," unquote. Derrida does not participate in the same disavowal and is not afraid to use the words that other philosophers and thinkers may have shied away from. So he easily uses words like Holocaust or genocide to describe in details the kinds of violence done to animals through industrial farming or biological experimentation and manipulation, all for the putative human well-being of man. As Matthew Calarco explains, Derrida's work is aimed at undercutting the kinds of humanist hierarchies that oppose such analogies as scandalous simply because they compare human and non-human life. In tracking and deconstructing the subject of human being from René Descartes through Lacan, he attempts to uncover the fraudulent grounds on which the human has been defined in opposition to the animal and thereby claimed superiority over it. If thinking is, as Descartes puts it or posits, the famous dictum that we know, cogito ergo sum, or I think therefore I am, the essence of what or who I am as human, that is the cause of my being as human, I am a thinking animal. Derrida asks how we know that thinking is so different from sniffing or scenting, and why this zone of sensibility is so neglected or reduced to a secondary position in philosophy and the arts. So thinking versus all the other olfactory senses that we have, this distinction between them, and why philosophy considers thinking to be better than what we get through our senses, or what other living beings get through their senses. Yeah, animals, for example. Following a similar path in Immanuel Kant, he contains that insofar as the thoughts of those I follow become my thoughts, I must accept, even welcome, an irreducible hetero-affection, being affected by other at my core. In other words, I am moved not of my own volition, my own feelings or emotions, but by an other within me, residing within me. My autonomy as a self, to take the term that is essential Immanuel Kant's delineation of the human and reprisal of the Cartesian, to the extent that I may be moved by and moved in my thinking by an animal, as Derrida appears to have been moved to write these lectures by the look of his cat. He demonstrates that the self is not autonomous and its heteronomous other is not necessarily human. Those who have pets at home or plants at home would definitely feel what Derrida is trying to say here. By the way, this book, The Animal That Therefore I Am, was initially a series of lectures that was delivered by Jacques Derrida, 9 hours lecture series. After his death, those lectures were converted into a book. Okay, so if Derrida scrutinizes humans for being autobiographical and egotistic, and animals being treated as other, one more philosopher, a thinker, Michael Marder,
बरं का सायंकाळी सांगा पण मध्ये नको सांग.
Okay, Michael Marder takes into account plant life. So we have seen that how Derrida talks about animals and says that human beings are focused mostly on themselves and their idea of self is completely dependent on others. Michael Marder takes into account plant life or vegetative life at the center of his writing. He's one of the most fascinating recent philosophers that we have in continental philosophy tradition. In the first part of the book, The Philosopher's Plant, published in 2014, Marder points out how Plato was dismissive of vegetative life or thinks that there is nothing to be learned from the plants. This is what Plato thinks. And we'll try and read from an excerpt from Marder's text. And I quote, "In Phaedrus, a dialogue overtly hostile to ars rhetorica, and even more so to writing, the dramatic setting is equally telling. Socrates and his companion, who lends his name to the title of the exchange, find themselves in the countryside. Phaedrus singles out a particularly auspicious place for the rest of the conversation, a soft patch of grass shaded by a tall plane tree, platanos. Does the idyllic natural setting stand for a counterweight to writing and rhetoric? Those despised excesses of civilization? Not quite. A few pages into the dialogue, Socrates will confess, "You see, I'm fond of learning. Now the country places and the trees won't teach me anything, and the people in the city do. We cannot learn anything from trees, comfortable as it may be to converse in their shade on a scorching summer's day. The city with its marketplace is still the preferred place for philosophizing," unquote. So some of his other books that Marder's other books that you might want to have a look at are Plant Thinking, A Philosophy of Vegetal Life, published in 2013. Through Vegetal Being is one more book. Through Vegetal Being, Two Philosophical Perspectives, published in 2016, written along with Luce Irigaray. We know her for feminist approaches or feminist literary theory, developing from a correspondence between Luce Irigaray and Michael Marder through Vegetal Being is an intense personal, philosophical, and political meditation on the significance of the vegetal for our lives, our ways of thinking, and our relations with human and non-human beings. The vegetal world has the potential to rescue our planet and our species. Luce Irigaray has argued in her philosophical work that living and coexisting are deficient unless we recognize sexuate difference as a crucial dimension of our existence. Michael Marder believes the same is true for vegetal difference. So how vegetative life around us is important for us to exist and cohabit this world. Irigaray and Marder consider how plants contribute to human development by sustaining our breathing, nourishing our senses, and keeping our bodies and minds alive. The discussion points toward a more universal way of becoming human that is embedded in the vegetal world. One more example of dealing with the issues of anthropocentric thinking is the way Michel Serres shows us how to extend the purview of social contract to get nature involved in it and complement it with the natural contract. Now, all these thinkers and philosophers that we are talking about, their ideas, I think, become very important for all of us to create our own methods, to analyze literature, and add value to eco-criticism. I haven't come across books or volumes that would talk about these thinkers and these approaches. So this is a new area that one can explore as far as eco-criticism is concerned. That's why discussion of the books and these philosophers appears here. Okay, so natural contract. Michel Serres' book, The Natural Contract, was published in the year 1990 in French. Its English translation came out in 1995. Well, to understand what Serres means by natural contract, let's first quickly have a look at what social contract is. For political philosophy or in political philosophy, social contract is an actual or hypothetical compact or agreement between the ruled or between the ruled and their rulers, defining the rights and duties of each. We are all bound by social contract. For example, Constitution of India, since we are residents, citizens of this country, but I don't think any of us have ever signed on paper the Constitution of India. We all do abide by it implicitly. So social contract theories are associated with thinkers like Thomas Hobbes, Jean Locke, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. This theory is focused on advantages of organized government and why all reasonable people should accept it as a voluntary obligation, the way we all do. The implicit social contract supports our living together. Serres would point out that social contract tends to forget, even abhor the world outside it. So the nature around it is not at all cared for by the social contracts. It's all about human beings. So it leads to a distorted view of reality. We live in some sort of unreal, hyper-real world in which only human beings exist. This results in an imbalance between the human polis or cities or state, which becomes the focus, and social contract forgets the nature of the world around on which it is dependent all the time. So Sayre states that this kind of willful ignorance of the world outside the polis was innocent enough during the period when the human capacity to change the natural world was minimal. But pre-industrial area, let's say. But in our industrial and post-industrial world, we can no longer ignore the world with impunity. One of the ways in which we can start paying attention to and taking care of the nature is by using the already available tools. So social contract is one tool, that's what Sayre would say. And our surrender to and understanding of social contract can be of good use as we can deal with the ecological issues at hand, what's happening now, here and now in immediate time and space. So we don't have to talk about climate change, say after 1,000 years or 5,000 years, and what would happen after that and what would happen to our coming generations. We can actually focus on right now, our contemporary time. We do not need radically new ideas or unheard of concepts to champion a new ecological sensitivity. Sayre would say in the social contract, if the social contract names a set of implicit agreements and commitments expected to ensure the mutual benefit and general well-being of all subjects of law in a given society, then we can definitely arrive at a settlement of mutual benefit between the human and non-human subjects of law. The natural contract should be the next step in modernity's progress towards universal rights and universal suffrage. Remember that modernity was also about equality among the human beings. So the contract with the nature is the necessary expression of modernity, where we're trying to bring the equality between the binary that we have already looked at, nature and non-nature, or nature and culture, or nature and human. Sayre urges us to make the nature our partner, and doing that he gives reference to the Roman ways of life where women, slaves, and children had no rights in the polis. And for a very long period of time, we all know that women did not have rights, slavery was practiced, children obviously still do not have rights to vote. So Sayre would compare the situation to nature around us and the way we treat it. And I quote from Sayre's book, tomorrow we will think about nature with the same shame that today we feel at having taken so long to understand that our companions should have become our partners, to say the very least, since the beginning of the world. Unquote. So Sayre's natural contract is the ecological wager. We should allow a natural world into our social mechanisms and concepts. We need to look at what the social contracts excluded all these years. I think this sets up the stage pretty well for a kind of historical account of eco-criticism, or what eco-criticism is, or how it is being defined. As I've already said, some of these ideas can be definitely used to think about the relationship between nature and literature and human beings in a completely new way. Okay, so eco-criticism beginnings. Literary and cultural scholars have been developing ecologically informed criticism of literature since the 1970s, but not in an organized manner. There was no separate anthology or a book as such devoted specifically to eco-criticism till 1985 published. Frederick Wog's edited Teaching Environmental Literature, Materials, Methods, Resources book. Wag's book was followed by special environmental issues of established literary journals, and as Cheryl Glotfelty, quite famous and quite often referred eco-critic, states, and I quote, "Some English departments began to offer a minor environmental literature courses," unquote. One should also take note of 1960 published book, Silent Spring, written by Rachel Carson, which talks about negative effects of pesticides on the environment and horticulture. Eco-critics have categorized writings that deal with ecology in three sections: nature writing, environmental literature, and eco-literature. Writing, it is nature-oriented, and its regard for the non-human is its prominent feature. So most of the writings which have this regard for non-human would be considered nature writing. In eco-literature, nature is not just a framing device or setting against which the fiction or the events take place, but it plays an important active role and suggests that human history is implicated in natural history. The accountability to the nature on the part of human is central to the text's orientation. Cheryl Glotfelty and Harold Fromm edited the book, The Eco-Criticism Reader, published in 1996, is the first major book to be published in the organization of important conferences on eco-criticism. In 1992, Western. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Okay, thank you. In 1992, Western Literature Association decided to form a new association for the study of literature and environment, ASLE, ASLE, short form. The mission of ASLE was to promote the exchange of ideas and information pertaining to literature that considers the relationship between human beings and the natural world, and to encourage new nature writing, traditional and innovative scholarly approaches to environmental literature, and interdisciplinary environmental research. In 1993, Patrick established a new journal, ISLE, Interdisciplinary Studies in Literature and Environment. By this time, ecological literary study had gained momentum as a recognizable critical school. Glotfelty defines eco-criticism in following way: is the study of the relationship between literature and the physical environment, just as feminist criticism examines language literature from a gender-conscious perspective, and Marxist criticism brings an awareness of modes of production and economic class to its reading of texts. Eco-criticism takes an earth-centered approach to literary studies. Glotfelty states further that eco-critics and theorists asks questions like, how is nature represented in this sonnet? What role does the physical setting play in the plot of this novel? How do our metaphors of the land influence the way we treat it? In addition to race, class, and gender, and caste in case of India, should place become a new critical category? How has the concept of wilderness changed over time? In what ways and to what effect is the environmental crisis seeping into contemporary literature and popular culture. She further states that all ecological criticism shares the fundamental premise that human culture is connected to the physical world, affecting it and affected by it. Eco-criticism takes its subject the interconnections between nature and culture, specifically the cultural artifacts of language and literature. As a theoretical discourse, it negotiates between the human and the non-human. The term eco-criticism was first coined by William Rueckert in his essay Literature and Ecology, an experiment in eco-criticism. For Rueckert, eco-criticism is the application of ecology and ecological concepts to the study of literature. Simple, short. The application of ecology and ecological concepts, the study of literature. Well, you'll realize that Glotfelty's definition is more inclusive as it tries to look at all the possible relations between literature and the physical world around. So some other terms operative around the same time were eco-poetics, environmental literary criticism, and green cultural studies. Most of the critics prefer the term eco over enviro, as enviro is anthropocentric, environment, the word environment is anthropocentric, and dualistic, implying that we humans are at the center of the world. The term eco, on the other hand, is more symbiotic. It tries to treat the nature and human and how they can coexist as an issue. However, the important question is how we, students and teachers of literature, can contribute to the ecological restoration. Can we play any significant role? Donald Wordsworth, a historian, suggests that, and I quote, historians, along with literary scholars, anthropologists and philosophers, cannot do the reforming. Of course, but they can help with the understanding of the issues, unquote, while mapping the development, and we will try and see how literature and historians and literary scholars and philosophers, we have already seen how philosophers have written about the world around and how thinking from the point of view of nature would help us in several ways. And we will, in the last part of this session, get to know how literature helps in dealing with all these crisis situations, or how awareness can be created with the help of literature, with the help of techniques of storytelling. While mapping the development of ecological criticism or eco-criticism and the texts that should be included under this banner, Glotfelty follows Ellen Showalter's model of 3 developmental stages of feminist criticism, as it provides her a useful scheme for describing 3 analogous phases in eco-criticism. The first stage accounts for the following issues: how nature is represented in literature, for example, Eden, Arcadia, virgin land, a miasmal swamp, savage wilderness, and absence of the natural world too. Other topics include animals, cities, specific geographical regions, rivers, mountains, garbage, technology, and the body. So how all this gets represented in literature. In the second stage, one observes an effort to recuperate the neglected genre of nature writing, nature-oriented non-fiction, originating in England and reaching America. Glotfelty observes that eco-critics draw from other critical theories like new criticism, psychoanalysis, feminism, deconstruction, structuralism, Russian formalism, to talk about literature and how nature gets reflected in literature. The third stage is theoretical phase, which tries to examine the symbolic construction of species. How has literary discourse defined the human? Ecofeminism, for example, comes under third stage. Ecofeminism tries to examine the link between the oppression of women and the domination of nature. These dominations or these operations run parallel. Glotfelty acknowledges that, and it's a very humble and good acknowledgement that Glotfelty has included in her writing. And I quote, eco-criticism has been predominantly a white movement. It will become ethnic when stronger connections are made between the environment and issues of social justice, and when diversity of voices are encouraged to contribute to the discussion. So American eco-criticism takes its literary bearings from three major 19th century American writers whose work celebrate nature and wilderness in America: Ralph Waldo Emerson, Margaret Fuller, and David Henry Thoreau. These authors were contemporaries and had similar themes in their writings. They were transcendentalists. Emerson's first book, Nature, called Nature, published in 1836, is about the nature's influence on him. Let's read from the chapter 1 to see how nature is described and how it affects Emerson. And I quote, "The greatest delight which the fields and woods minister is the suggestion of an occult relation between man and the vegetable. I am not alone and unacknowledged. They nod to me, and I to them. The waving of the boughs in the storm is new to me and old at the same time. It takes me by surprise and yet is not unknown. Its effect is like that of a higher thought or a better emotion coming over me. When I deemed I was thinking justly or doing right," unquote. This is quite a dramatic description of the influence of nature on Emerson, and quite romantic as well at the same time. Similarly, Margaret Fuller's first book was Summer on the Lake, a personal diary or a journal, so to say, about her experiences with American landscape. Thoreau's book, Walden, published in 1854, describes his experiences for 2 years from 1845 to 1847 of nature, living by the lake, and his encounters with the small animals, his experiments with farming and veganism. The theme of return to nature and falling out of modern city life is common in these three authors. These are the primary writings of American ecological writings that we see. The British eco-criticism, on the other hand, begins with the Romantics like William Wordsworth and S.T. Coleridge in around 1790s. We all are well aware of Wordsworth's and Coleridge's writings and how nature gets reflected in the poems and even the preface to lyrical ballads. It is not that nature was never present in the writings of authors other than what we have mentioned just now. Eco-critics would read literature to find out how nature is represented and what relations between human and nature appear in the work of art. For example, Robert Watson in the essay Renaissance Selfhood and Shakespeare's Comedy of the Commons, published in the Routledge Companion to Environmental Humanities in 2017, states that, and I quote, "Shakespeare's tragedies predominantly warn of the costs of a hubristic investment in the self and its insularity." This is something that is visible in Jacques Derrida's book, The Animal That Therefore I Am, and we have already read from it. The comedies, on the other hand, depict the redemptive force of accepting one's place in nature and nature's place within oneself. Michael Marder's emphasis on vegetative life is something that we have already read, and this section reflects that. And the late career tragicomedies reconcile human aspirations with the functions of the biosphere. Now, this is something evident in Michel Serres' Natural Conflict, from which we read. As an ecological view of life, comedy tends to be greener than tragedy, unquote. There is a growing concern among intellectuals about why there aren't many novels written on the ecological issues. Now, these are recent concerns. Amitabh Ghosh, in his 2016 published book, The Great Derangement, Climate Change, and the Unthinkable, talks about this. However, there is some fiction coming up in the area called climate fiction, and this is quite a recent phenomena that you would come across, cli-fi or climate fiction. A survivor, for example, in Jesse Greengrass' haunting new novel, The High House, published in April 2011, sums it up, and I quote from it: the whole complicated system of modernity, which had held us up away from the earth, was crumbling, and we were becoming again what we had used to be, cold and frightened of the weather and frightened of the dark. Somehow, while we had all been busy, while we had been doing those small things which added up to living, the future had slipped into the present. Greengrass is among a growing number of novelists who are confronting this unfolding catastrophe through the young genre of climate fiction, or cli-fi. In the novel Gun Island, published in 2019, Amitabh Ghosh answers his own provocation. He deploys myth and mysticism and the historic movement of language, animals, and people around the globe. This novel climaxes in mass migration of whales and dolphins, an implausible freak event that is also an observable physical phenomenon. Maya Lund, in a novel, The History of Bees, published in 2018, it is set in China of 2098. It's set in future, when bees have gone extinct, forcing humans to apply pollen by hand to fruit trees, or there will be no food. It's the first in Maya Lund's quartet about how man and nature are intertwined. So Maya Lund will produce 3 more novels, sequence to the history of bees. In fact, in China, in Hanyuan County, people use hand pollination method as bees got extinct in this province. Maya Lund was present for the Jaipur Literary Festival that took place in January 2019, and her interview that she gave in Jaipur Literary Festival 2019 is available on YouTube. You just do some search and you would easily find it. And there are authors who have approached the crisis through unexpected lenses. Mehdi Okorafar's short story, Spider, the Artist, published in 2011, imagines a future Nigeria. So this comes from Africa, South Africa, where life is dying. But she brings in spider beasts from African legends as guards for a water source. Dominican novelist Rita Indiana binds the climate emergency to gender, race, and colonialism in the Caribbean in her work published in 2018. Climate fiction is popular enough that it's spawned satires and its subgenres. There are works that envision a better future for the earth once we take action now. Stories typically look at realistic solutions,
কোনটা ব্যাগ
drawing
লেগেছে
on the young generation
এলসিডিটা আজকে যাবো
maker,
বাংলা উপর
the young generation's maker culture for creative hacks and collaborative ways forward. At Stanford, biological anthropologist and environmental scientist James Holland Jones has asked another pertinent question. Can stories lead to social action? Now, this is something that we all need to be concerned about. Again, as students of literature and teachers of literature, can stories lead to social action? His research, his work examines the impact of climate fiction, how the prospect of a bleak or better future might change present behavior. He believes it can, and I quote from his talk, "It's a mistake to think that facts speak for themselves. Facts are always incorporated into narrative," unquote. He said in a talk hosted by the non-profit Long Now Foundation in San Francisco in January 2019. In a world where politicians and others frequently peddle fictions, the fiction author can tell truths that people otherwise wouldn't hear. Very important statement. Well, some of the features of climate fiction are as follows. Climate fiction is far less dramatic than what we come across in climate fiction that's available in visual form in films. Novels are less dramatic. The climate is a backdrop to other plot developments. Post-apocalyptic settings focus on social and psychological dynamics. Maya Lun's novel is a good example of this. Climate fiction is not about escaping disaster. It's about the cost of survival, loss of plant diversity, carbon rationing, bioterrorism, new species, and community breakdowns. Well, scientists in climate fiction are often the heroes. The limitations of science are addressed. Plots are often scientifically accurate. A greater diversity of writers means books that are set in lesser known locations, feature women prominently, look at capitalism's role, of race relations and colonialism. Societies form collectives who govern isolated communities, share knowledge, take up new roles to keep society intact. Well, from transcendentalists and romantics to the recent climate fiction and the kind of philosophy that's coming up, the literature dealing with ecological concerns has come a long way and surely provide us ample scope for eco-critical methods to be used for analysis of texts and the relationship humans have with the nature. Its interdisciplinary nature makes it a far more interesting area of study. I think I would stop here. If any of you are interested, we can read from some climate fiction, at least some paragraphs. But it all depends on you, whether you people want to read or me read one or two paragraphs. I'm done. I think we should open it up for question answer session. Do we have any questions?
Hello.
Hello.
May I ask you one query and doubt, sir, or doubt?
Yes.
First of all, Thank you very much. This is your very scholarly presentation, sir. And I have one query. Can we relate dominance of casteism with respect to unequal distribution of resources in eco-criticism studies, sir?
A very important and interesting question. I think we can do this. I think definitely. One of the ways to do this would be, again, go back and have a look at the idea of social contract first, and then the natural contract. We know that in the caste hierarchy, a particular caste had to take the carcasses of the dead animals out of the village, and these castes had to depend on the dead animals' meat. One. Second, Dalits had to, lower castes had to convey the messages of death in a family. And at that point of time, we all know that there were no vehicles available, and obviously Dalits did not have access to the public transportation. There was no idea of public transportation in the first place. So Dalits had to run or walk or do whatever they could to reach to the other village, however long a distance run it is. So the effect of caste issues or domination of particular caste over others can definitely be studied using eco-critical methods.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Hello.
Yes.
Hello, sir. Sir,
Yes,
I wanted to know, yes, sir, I wanted to know if eco-criticism can be applied in the area of subaltern studies. And in this view that Spivak talks about the human-animal boundary in the case of Bertha Mason, or in the case of Adivasis as well, we see in mainstream literature a lot of metaphors used as animal metaphors. So the othering in terms of anthropocentric thinking, and there is idea of other as animal, human and non-human. This is extended to humans as well, especially the marginalized communities, it seems to me. So can we extend this idea of eco-criticism in specifically in these terms of anthropocentrism and defining the other as animal to subaltern studies as well, as in the human-animal boundary as Spivak speaks about?
Definitely. But one thing that we have to be aware of is that a literary theory or philosophy or eco-criticism, as we are having a look at today, is not something that can be applied. We do not force theories and concepts and methods of criticism on a particular text. The text themselves have to reveal some of these issues, one. Second, yes, subaltern studies, ideas from subaltern studies can also be used or fused with eco-criticism. For example, can the subaltern speak has this message in it that no, we as human beings, those who are not subalterns, cannot listen to them. One, we do not have the desire to listen to people. Yeah, and the moment you start voicing yourself, you do not remain a subaltern. In the same way, when we are talking about the anthropocentric knowledge creation and the methods of knowledge creation, obviously, the same can be applied to nature. Can the subaltern speak? Obviously, it cannot. What we are experiencing nowadays the climate crisis that we have is a kind of a failure of natural contract that should have been maintained between human and nature. And as far as literature is concerned, yes, we all know that that in tribal areas, whenever there are attempts by governments for, under the name of development, cutting of forests, the tribal communities have vehemently denied it. That's what has been happening in Naxal areas. The Naxal movement was also to save the forest, the tribal people's own habitat.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. My point specifically was only in terms of how humans are also deemed as animals and hence the other, and that comparison sort of seems very applicable to what Derrida had said. So
the language is mostly metaphorical. The metaphors can be used, but we all know that it's human beings who, in anthropocentric way, treat other living beings or call them, as Derrida said, gives them name of animal or plant and treat them as other.
Right. Thank you, sir. Yes.
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah, I just want to ask this idea of development. I just want to confine the, I'll sort of say evolve. How evolved is the term development is, how that can be applied with the eco criticism kind of thing. Development, how do we look at development? Even though when we see that development has to be with the human face, when we talk about human face, what do you mean by human face? Should we look at the redistribution of the resources in the light of the movements of the subaltern, as the question was asked before?
Okay, so you want to ask what happens to development and how we look at development from the point of view of eco-criticism.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
A simple answer: the development has to be sustainable. It has to take into account that we do not pollute the earth much. One, we do care for the plant and the animal as living beings. We try and form some sort of contract, though anybody would say that, well, plants and animals won't be able to sign, or nature won't be able to sign a contract. But as I've already said this, I don't think any of us have signed the Constitution of India, which is a social contract for us. Yeah. So the development has to be sustainable. One. Second, it also has to take into account the moment we reduce the greenhouse gases and CO2 emissions, of new avenues of jobs and work to be provided for common people. It has to be all inclusive. That's how eco-criticism, or thinking from eco-criticism's point of view, development should be thought about.
No, asking development, distribution, redistribution of the resources, capitalism, and the eco-criticism. How do you link it actually? I mean to say, like complementary, supplementary, how do you look at it? I mean to say, in the literary theory.
Through the eco-critics would mostly not be happy with capitalistic ways of evasion of nature. One, yeah, eco-criticism as a method would say whatever nomenclature you use with a development or any other thing, you have to respect the nature. You have to take into account the nature. So the anthropocentrism, or opposing the anthropocentrism that some of the recent philosophers have been doing, like Michael Marder, Michel Serres, even Bruno Latour, that's what they've been doing. or even Noam Chomsky that we read. In fact, I should read out the solutions that they suggest. So, in the book, Noam Chomsky would say, or a global Green New Deal would say, greenhouse gas emissions reductions will at least achieve the targets set in 2018 by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, namely a 45% reduction in global emissions by 2030 and the attainment of net zero emissions by 2050. Net zero emissions by 2050. Investments to radically raise energy efficiency standards and equally dramatically expand the supply of solar, wind, and other clean renewable energy sources will form the leading edge of the transition to a green economy in all regions of the world. Number 3, the green economy transition will not expose workers, very important, in the fossil fuel industry and other vulnerable groups to the plague of joblessness and the anxieties of economic insecurity, something that people in India or all over the world probably have experienced during the time of the pandemic. Number 4, economic growth must proceed along a sustainable and egalitarian path such that climate stabilization is unified with the equally important goals of expanding job opportunities and raising mass living standards for working people and the poor throughout the world. I think this should answer your question.
Anil, hello.
Yes.
There are some questions in the chat box.
Okay, I'll have a look.
Hello.
Yes.
Sir, training sir. May I ask some questions? Your lecture was so enlightened, sir. My question is that how we can correlate eco-criticism with feminism, sir?
Cheryl Rotfelty uses Ellen Shorter's method of developing feminism into 3 stages, and she also says that the domination or suppression of women and the domination of nature is something that runs parallel. So one just has to look at the history and the times when human beings started settling in this land. It was close to the farming, and it was mostly women who would work in the farms and not men. That's what history tells us. Men would mostly be hunting and gathering. 1. Second, the othering of nature and the othering of women again would run parallel. So some ways of looking at it would be in literature how the female characters treat nature or animals, and what kind of relationship women share with the nature. This is one area that one can
Thank you, sir.
Look at.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot.
Okay, so the utopian fiction has always dreamt of nature and human beings in harmony with each other. How does eco-criticism look at it? It wants to look at it in the same way. Eco-criticism is not a fixed method. Eco-criticism would want to look at this harmony, would want to find this harmony in reality as well as in fiction. If it's not there with the use of eco-critical methods, you can say that particular kinds of novels are dominated by the ideology of capitalism that tries to overpower nature. Whereas there would be some novels like there's a novel by Tutuola, an African Nigerian novelist, called The Palm Wine Drinker, where the sun, the moon, the bush, the forest, the trees, these are all characters and they talk to the human beings. So how do you talk about this relationship that is being depicted in this kind of novel between the nature and human talking to each other, living in harmony? Eco-criticism, it would not give you ready-made ideas. You will have to, depending on how the novel is, the play is, or the poetry is, and what kind of relationship comes up after a very close reading, careful reading of the text, you will be able to formulate your own methods based on ideas from eco-criticism, and then say write a research paper or write your thesis for PhD, MPhil. There won't be any fixed ways of doing it. We all love utopian fiction. Dystopia too is being used, by the way, in climate fiction. I think we had a look at Maya Lund's novel, which is on bees. It's a very good example of utopian fiction. It's actually a mix of utopia and dystopia. The more utopian fiction is written, the way we ended this session, the better it would be for younger generations to understand the seriousness of crisis, ecological crisis. Yes, can eco-criticism be traced in Amitabh Ghosh's novels? Yes. In fact, eco-critics would, while reading a novel, try and find out the relationship between characters and nature, whether nature is present in the novels, what kind of nature, what kind of relationships. Along with it, eco-criticism would also give you methods to say that why there is no nature or a representation of nature in the novel. It would also help you to talk about novels which are all about machines. Yeah? So eco-criticism actually uses new criticism, Marxism, feminism, to look into the relationship between culture and nature that's represented in the novels, or fiction, or literature for that matter.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Sir, I have a simple inquiry. How far humanism, being anthropocentric, is opposed to eco-criticism?
Eco-criticism, I think we began with this quotation by Jacques Derrida, where he says that coherence in contradiction shows us the force of desire. Even this eco-critical writings mostly would be anthropocentric, in the sense that it's human beings who again are creating this knowledge, right? But at the same time, at least there is an attempt of trying to establish some sort of balance in this imbalanced relationship between nature and human. So humanities, I think sporadically post 1960s has been trying to be as less anthropocentric as possible.
Thank you.
So we have seen examples from Noam Chomsky from Jacques Derrida, from Michel Serres, Michael Marder, these theorists, they have been trying their best not to be thinking from only human beings' point of view, not to be anthropocentric.
Thank you very much.
And please remember, as students of literature, we need to note this. It's mostly fiction which would allow us to take flights of imagination and think from the point of view of nature, plants, animals, however impossible it is in reality. Fiction and literature provides us this opportunity to mend the broken relationship between men or human beings and nature.
Thank you, sir. Actually, yeah.
It's time for the next session.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
Devde sir. Sharoy ma'am.
I would again want to thank Professor Dr. Sharad Binnor, who has taught to me back in 2003, and we are still in touch, for giving me this opportunity to do this session on eco-criticism. I'm also thankful to the principal, Professor V.B. Gaikwad, principal of KTHM College. It was a good experience. I'm happy that
Thank you, Anil. Thank you.
For the college.
Wait, sir. Professor Rathod is there for proposing vote of thanks.
Yes.
Rathod, sir, please go ahead.
Yes. Okay, sir. Good afternoon, one and all. It gives me an immense pleasure to deliver the vote of thanks for this session. And I would like to thank Dr. Anil Sonawane, sir, for an interesting talk on eco-criticism and thoughts on ecological issues, which are presently burning issues nowadays. I would also like to thank Honorable Principal Dr. V.B. Gaikwad, sir, Professor Dr. Binnor, sir, Head of the Department, Dr. Tushar Patil, sir, Coordinator of this FDP, Dr. Yogesh Gangude, sir, the mentor, and organizing committee members. Finally, I would like to thank all our dear participants. Once again, I thank one and all those who are present here. Thank you. Darshan sir?
Rathod,
Darshan,
sir? Yes, please.
Whether the ma'am is joined or not.
Yeah. But we will wait for a minute, and thereafter we will begin second session.
Okay.
Participants, we will just
let me know.
Participants, we will just wait for a minute, and thereafter we will begin with second session. Okay. Just wait for a minute. Don't leave the meeting. Be in the meeting. We are just having 1 minute's halt.
Anil sir, hello.